I would like now to introduce Ms. Rosalie Keach, member of the Board of Directors and observer to the UN for League of Women's Voters and member of the Board of Trustees for League of Women's Voters Education Fund. Please.
As we sit in this meeting room celebrating the 70th anniversary of the United Nations, I'd like you to take a look around. Look at all the representatives that are here from the NGOs, academia, and the private sector, all the ambassadors and staff from the member states, and all the personnel from the myriad of UN agencies. Think of the problems that have been solved here, saving and enhancing countless lives around the world. And think what would have happened if the United Nations did not exist. Because in 1945, it was possible that the UN may not have been born. The League of Nations did not make it, and that the war that spurred that concept was called the War to End All Wars. So no, the establishment of the United Nations in 1945 was not a done deal. What was the difference between the failure of the League of Nations and the success of the United Nations? Let me take you back in time to 1944, when Franklin Delano Roosevelt was President of the United States. He was in Woodrow Wilson's administration when the League of Nations failed, and he was determined it would not happen again. His wife, Eleanor Roosevelt, had been an active member of the League of Women Voters of the United States when we were founded in 1920. She was asked to serve as an active member of the New York State Board in 1920 by LWV New York President Vanderlip. Mrs. Roosevelt distinguished herself on the New York State Board by working with progressives like Mrs. Vanderlip on programs regarding child labor, education, poverty eradication, and women's working conditions. She was in the audience at the LWV U.S. National Convention in 1921 when our founder, Carrie Chapman Catt, stirred the assemblage to work for an international body dedicated to peace by stating, "I am for a League of Nations. Let us consecrate ourselves to put war out of the world." In 1922, Mrs. Roosevelt was made chair of the National Advocacy Committee of the League and remained active until 1933 when she became First Lady. She maintained the personal relationships with the progressive women she had worked with at the League and credits the League with stirring the political passions within her and giving her voice and access to the most progressive women of the day. So in 1944, when FDR was looking for a way to mobilize the country for the post-war view that would include an international body that was dedicated to peace, he turned to his wife's friends at the League of Women Voters and asked that they get involved. And get involved we did. We started a campaign to drum up support within the State Department, which was not on board, flooding them with 1,000 letters every day. In the autumn of 1944, we launched the Take It to the People campaign, distributing millions of pieces of literature and holding educational forums throughout the country, urging attendees to write their senators for approval of the United Nations Charter, resulting in ratification by the U.S. Senate on July 28, 1945, by a vote of 89-2. We sent Anne Hartwell Johnstone to the San Francisco conference in 1945, where the U.S. delegation asked her to assume leadership to help create the Commission on the Status of Women. And when the CSW was created, it was Judge Dorothy Kenyon, a former League of Women Voters New York officer, who was its first U.S. representative. I want to take you back again to the 1920s when Eleanor Roosevelt was chair of the LWV U.S. Advocacy Committee and before she was First Lady. During this time, there were 4 centers of women's political power in New York State, and the League was part of those centers. Eleanor Roosevelt was in the thick of those centers as well, working for social change to improve the lives of women and children. She worked alongside women like Frances Perkins, who was to become FDR's Secretary of Labor during the Depression years, and put into place programs that would help improve the lives of women and children. And it was during those years that she formed her opinion that women go into politics to change the world. So in 1945, when then President Truman asked her to be part of the first U.S. delegation to the newly formed United Nations, she went. It was a result of her commitment to those that didn't have voices, and because of her skills as a nonpartisan politician, that the newly formed ECOSOC asked her to be part of a small nuclear commission. This Human Rights Commission, with Eleanor Roosevelt as chair, went on to form the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, which was ratified in 1948 by a vote of 48-0. Through the decades, our work at the UN continued, promoting its achievements and engaging on the issues of concern of the day. Moving forward to 1995, the League of Women Voters went to the Beijing conference. The League was represented there by our main observer, Marjorie Cohen, who recognized that only by working in concert with other women and NGOs will we be able to achieve the goals identified in Beijing. And she recognized that if a girl didn't get to grow up to be a woman, there was no point in women's rights. So she and Doris Shapira, who later became our UN main observer, helped to form a new organization within UNICEF, the Working Group on Girls. WGG worked with other NGOs to make sure that girls and their human rights were recognized throughout the UN Assembly. Using the same advocacy and education tactics that the League used in 1944 to drum up support for approving the UN Charter, we continually work with our partners in WGG and the larger UN community to ensure that girls have a right to a violence-free environment, education, and self-determination for a full life. As a result of these and other efforts, on December 19, 2011, the United Nations General Assembly adopted Resolution 66/170 to declare 11 October as the International Day of the Girl Child, to recognize girls' rights and the unique challenges girls face around the world. Okay, so I know from a historical perspective, all of this is very good. We have a United Nations, there's the Commission on the Status of Women, Universal Declaration of Human Rights, Working Group on Girls, and the International Day of the Girl Child. But what has the League of Women Voters done lately? Today, the League of Women Voters can be seen working with our partners on major issues of importance to the lives of women and girls everywhere. We utilize the power of the United Nations as a magnet to the leaders of government, civil society, academia, and the private sector to tackle issues of concern. And we utilize the power of the League of Women Voters, which values civil discourse of issues to develop strategies, interventions, programs, and solve issues around the world. In a place where talk is plentiful, it's important to remember that action in local communities throughout the world is what will solve the problems of the world. For the past 4 years, we partner with member states including Germany, Brazil, Turkey, Sweden, Canada, Philippines, Tanzania, New Zealand, El Salvador, Poland, United States, with other NGOs and coalitions, with UN agencies including UNICEF, ECOSOC, UN Women, President of the General Assembly, and the Special Representative to the Secretary General to prevent violence against children, and also with the private sector and academia. We partner with all of these organizations and others to work on the issues of main concern to us. Number one, to increase women's leadership and participation in democratic political processes, to achieve social and economic change by highlighting best practices around the world to encourage others to adopt those practices. Number two, furthering democracy around the world by intervening at appropriate times to encourage extending voting rights to women. Number three, promote gender equality and human rights for all women and girls by highlighting best practices around the world and participating in programs that accomplish same. And number four, prevent violence against women and girls by developing strategies, providing opportunities for not only sharing those best practices, but directly working with the governments, the private sector, academia, and civil society to implement the practices at the community level. And so I ask each and every one of you What is it that you want to accomplish? As I look around this room, I see a group that can achieve the global goals if we work together to understand the underlying root causes, clearly articulate the issues, highlight those best practices that work in local communities, as well as measure the progress that's being made to make the global goals happen. Let us carry on the legacy of the great women and men that came before us to accomplish our dreams. For as Eleanor Roosevelt said, the future belongs to those who believe in the beauty of their dreams.
Thank you. Thank you, Ms. Keach.